Hello guys! In today's video, we will do an analysis of the technical details and double polling of one of the best to ever do it, Tord Asle Gjerdalen. Last week, there was a video on this channel about the top 5 skiers of all time in this specific technique. He came 4th in the ranking, but the video was more about functional threshold power and absolute level, more than necessarily technical finesse itself. However, Gjerdalen is probably the best technician of those guys. Let's find out why. Just to be clear before we start, when talking about technique in cross-country skiing, just like training volume, there isn't one single correct answer. People are built differently, have different anatomies, moment arms, and have difference in strength and mobility. So just because a certain solution is optimal for one guy, doesn't necessarily mean it's the right for someone else. You need to find the most effective movement pattern for your body. There are a lot more factors contributing to why someone moves in a certain way and why some people are more efficient than others. But this video isn't meant to dive deep into the topic of cost of travel. Today we will simply have a look at why Gjerdalen is so excellent. Firstly, mobility. This is a fundamental quality required in order to move technically efficient and is neglected by the great majority of the skiing community. If this is something he has worked towards or if he just has this mobility naturally, I can't say. But regardless of how he got flexible, he has obviously a huge advantage there. Take a look at his back movements in particular. When he is seeking maximum speed in gentle downhill terrain, he has a very significant fall in the upper body. The speed is a product of the frequency and the distance per stroke. Because his upper body is not limited anywhere, he is able to almost jump forward, almost like a cheetah. If your whole upper body, and especially your back, has limited mobility, it will limit your possibility of achieving maximum stroke length and double polling on flats and in downhills. In uphills, having these long jumps won't be practical, so it won't matter in that type of terrain, but imagine. In flat terrain, if you lose 10 centimeters every single rep for 5 hours, due to limited mobility, it will significantly influence the total time in a long race. Gjerdalen has a relatively low frequency, but at the same time he manages to avoid falling backwards with the hips. He is able to have the chest and hips forward. On the ski erg, you can measure the frequency. The frequency will always vary depending on the degree of incline, but in general, having over 1 stroke per second or 60 strokes per minute will be classified as a very high frequency, and having less than 40 strokes per minute will be seen as a very low frequency. He is one of the long-distance skiers with the lowest frequency, but the distance he is able to cover per stroke is on another level. Secondly, as you can see, he has a quite extreme forward fall in the upper body. This isn't possible to do without sufficient overall mobility, and neither is it possible without sufficient core strength. He has obviously an extremely strong core. This is something you can improve by using, for example, the AB wheel or other core exercises. It's not only about strengthening this area, but also about being able to control it. Certain strength exercises can help you control the center of your body in a better way, to make sure you don't bend over too much, but are able to hold back. You obviously will have to bend over a bit, especially when it gets steeper, but in this type of terrain, when you're really trying to go fast, too much bowing will not be effective. In downhill double polling, maximizing the length of the stroke is the most important thing. The distance covered will depend on a lot of factors, where the actual power output only will be one of several determining factors. Core strength, mobility, and technical abilities will also influence, so just because a guy is powerful, for example on the ski erg, doesn't necessarily mean he will be fast out in the tracks. Gjerdalen seems to me as a guy who has less power than you would expect, at least compared to athletes like Nygaard, Sundby, and Bolshinov, but he is just able to coordinate his body so efficiently to compensate for the lack of power. You can see in pure uphill races where brute power will have greater significance, Gjerdalen isn't as dominant as he is on flatter courses. Of course, his power output is at a very high level, but I don't think he is top 10 when just looking at watts and watts per kilo in isolation. He did a 5,000 meter test on the ski erg a few years ago, and I don't remember the exact time, but it was a significantly worse result than you would expect. Despite slightly weaker power numbers due to insane technical abilities, he is able to compensate. So the power isn't the only thing that matters in double polling. So what are the other details to point out? Combined with the quite extreme forward fall of the body, he has an equally extreme jump, or heel lift. He is gaining momentum through the jump. This is very interesting because this is actually different from what many other long-distance skiers choose to do. Going up on your toes or not in double poling is a never-ending discussion, it seems like. In recent times, many of the best classic skiers have moved away from it. According to them, the active up-on-toe move will not be as economical over long distances, and there is some research indicating that they're right. However, Geertelen and also 2017 version of Sundby, who won the Birkebeiner race, had also a quite significant heel lift in a large portion of the race. The advantages from going up on your toes are that you're able to cover a bigger distance, and you're also able to utilize more of your body weight to generate force through the poles and into the snow. It will probably cost more over time, though. Geertelen isn't always using this jumping-like technique. In longer races, you can also see him with flat heels. However, as soon as he is trying to go fast, he starts using this technique. This is unlike some of his rivals, like for example, Vokuev and Nygaard, who have the body weight more in the back part of the shoe and is almost locked in that position, even when the speed is higher. It's not only about the discussion of up on toe or not, but also about where in the shoe you have the pressure. Some people stand more on their heels while others have the weight concentrated more forward in the shoe. You can have the latter, also without going up on the toes. It can be like a marginal heel lift, enough to generate some momentum, but without too high cost. This is a very good way to do it, in my opinion. In this clip, you can notice this specific detail. Watch the feet in particular. One guy has marginal lifting of the heels, while the other guy has flat heels. In which part of the shoe they have the pressure is also a bit different, as you can see. Next, arm position. As you can see from straightforward angle, his arms are not super narrow, but they're not super wide either, like for example Bolshinov. It looks like they're slightly outside of shoulder width. At certain speeds and terrains, his arms are quite straight and a relatively long distance from the body, almost like what some people call the old school method. What also is quite remarkable is how locked his arms are. Some experts on skiing technique have discussed this topic of locked versus bent elbows for years. They claim, if you bend your elbows too much, it will be too much eccentric muscle work, which will result in a poor efficiency, and I agree with that. Back to what we talked about earlier with mobility. More mobility isn't always better either. In certain parts of the body, having more mobility might be beneficial, like for example in the quads, abdominals, and the back, but in the elbow joint, however, too much mobility will probably affect the efficiency negatively due to the eccentric muscle work explained. Having some tension and tightness in some muscles and tendons might be beneficial, while in other parts of the body it will only be limiting. It looks like Geertelen has a combination of a flexible upper body and a stiff arm and elbow joint, which actually is ideal when double poling. To me, he looks like a super specialized and maximized guy who have done a lot right over long periods, both in training and technique. Legs. Some people have pointed out that many of the best long-distance skiers are double poling with straighter legs than the World Cup skiers, and they claim this is a thing the Ski Classics athletes are doing better than the World Cup skiers. It's true they have straighter legs, but the question is this straight leg position because of or in spite of? Geertelen's legs are very straight when the speed is lower, while they're not the straightest at higher speeds. I do believe straighter legs will be more economical over very long distances, but the legs can't be totally straight either. It probably depends on the speed and the distance you are trying to improve at. The longer the distance and the lower speed, the straighter the legs should be, just like the flat heel thing mentioned earlier in this video. Pole position. The end piece of a pole is called a basket. Where you choose to plant the poles influences the effectiveness of the movement. If the poles are being planted into the snow with a too large distance between each other, it will not be the most effective. Too far behind the feet is also not as effective. In general, high-level skiers will put the poles into the snow in an almost vertical position and also more in front of the bindings than skiers at lower levels. The positioning of Geertelen's poles looks to be textbook. It's straight down and absolutely perfect, and that's one of the reasons why it looks so machine-like, effortless, and polished. All the force is going in the right direction, without any waste of energy. The only negative thing I would point out is the head position. I am not sure if this is a negative thing or not, but his head is at times hanging too much forward. Too crouched or bent head position might obstruct oxygen flow, but you shouldn't be too straight either. Maybe he can try getting his head up a little to avoid this hook-like head position, or maybe this is what works the best for him. Other than that, this is one of the best double polling technicians there's ever been, and you can learn a lot from this man. Hope you enjoyed the video and make sure to like and subscribe.